Hello and welcome to the Craft Witch Corner where I yap and craft. My name is Dex and my pronouns are he, they. Today's video, as you probably gather from the title, is why I use the label Chaotic Norse Practioner. This video was originally going to be why I use the label Chaotic Folk Practioner, and upon doing some deep thinking, meditating on it, and a little bit of researching, I realized that at this point to call myself a folk practitioner is not entirely accurate and a bit of a false statement, so we're going to talk about that. I want to say thank you very much to the person who commented on my video about basic spellcraft guidelines that I use for kind of calling out the fact that what I was talking about wasn't folk magic and all of that. More on that in another future video, but I really appreciate that because that comment is what inspired me to make this video and do this thinking and researching and whatever. So thank you so much to that person for leaving that comment and calling me out so that I could be made aware that I was wrong. The thing about labels is that they can never be truly accurate. I don't necessarily always even use a label, I just do what I do in my magical practice, right? Generally, labels are just a way to put ourselves in a box to be easily understood by others. I don't necessarily think this is a bad thing, but obviously it is not always a good thing either. It does help to be as concise as possible, I think, in a situation like making YouTube videos, because the label you use could very quickly and effectively explain to someone what you're doing, what you're going to be talking about, and the framework and the worldview and the lens that you're coming from, so that they can very quickly know how to approach the video. I am not in really any way ceremonial. I'm not into the ceremonial magic, but I still like to watch videos and read books by ceremonial magicians because I find it really interesting, and I think there are nuggets of wisdom as a more practical magic and very simple magic practitioner. There's still stuff that I can glean from it, and I still find it really interesting, and the history of it is really interesting, so I love to learn about it, but I'm not going to approach a video by a ceremonial magician as a step-by-step guide for my practice, right? I mean, I'm not going to do that with any video, but like, if I'm watching a video by a folk practitioner, that for me is going to be much more of an actual guide, whereas something from a ceremonial magician is just going to be interesting. It's just interesting to me, and I like to learn about different things in the broader witchcraft and occult culture. I think it's really interesting, but it's not really going to help my actual particular practice in the way that folk magic or folk practitioners or Norse practitioners would. So that is why I think, for me personally, I wanted to make this video to kind of clear up why I use these labels, why this is the kind of magic that I do, and the path that I am walking down. So yeah, after that very long explanation, let's get into it. Each part of this, so there's obviously 3 parts: Chaotic Norse Practioner. Each part is very specifically there and in the placement that it is for a very specific reason. So obviously we're going to start with chaotic. The reason that I use that word is the framework that I work in is chaos magic. This is a framework and a lens more than an actual kind of magic, because as a chaos practitioner, you can work within any system, any religion, any set of beliefs, and work literally any kind of magic and be a chaos practitioner. It is more about the way that you go about it, and there are 6 core principles. We're gonna get into that, but that is first and foremost where I'm coming from, is chaos. And I think that it also denotes in Chaotic Norse Practioner, I am working from a Norse perspective, but a very chaotic one. I am not aiming for complete historical accuracy. I am aiming for efficiency in what works for me. Norse is just where I'm at right now. Someday that could change. I don't personally see it changing because so far it has been incredibly effective for me and worked very well. But if someday it no longer is yielding results, I will shed the Norse label and the Norse beliefs and move on to something that is producing results. So the most important part for me is the chaotic label. Everything I do is chaotic. And I also think it's an amusing way to describe how I practice in not just the chaos lens, but also just in a generally chaotic way as a system. Everything we do is pretty chaotic and just weird and not necessarily following norms in any type of way. So I, in particular, have read the book Condensed Chaos by Phil Hine. I am going to read it again, and I do have plans to read other books on chaos magic, but at this point, this is the only book that I have read. I have done a lot of watching of channels such as Ivy Corvus here on YouTube that are chaos magic focused, as well as Kellyanne Maddox, who's also chaos magic focused, with the eclectic art magic kind of paradigm, specifically for Kellyanne, and a more ceremonial lens for Ivy Corvus. But specifically the core principles we're going to be talking about are from Condensed Chaos, and that is just where my information is coming from. But there are plenty of resources on chaos magic out there. The 6 core principles are the avoidance of dogmatism, personal experience is paramount, technical excellence, deconditioning, diverse approaches, and gnosis. The avoidance of dogmatism is basically contradict yourself. Change your mind at any time. Nothing has to be set in stone. I don't have to be a Norse practitioner for the rest of my life. If at some point it stops being helpful, I can shed that label. I don't have to believe it. And also being able to hold diametrically opposed beliefs at the same time, seeing the plausible and the implausible, and believing in just oppositional things. Personal experience is paramount. The way that Ivy Corvus says this is my favorite. I think it's really fun, and that is be your own mad scientist. Just try shit, experience things, experiment with different stuff. In the chaos framework, there's a very strong statement against armchair witching. You can't know by theory. You have to actually try and practice and get your hands a little dirty. Technical excellence is focused on rigorous self-assessment and analysis of experiments, of your skills. It is about developing a set of skills, developing your talents and abilities in the magical realms. It is just about doing what you're doing to the best of your ability. Deconditioning is about widening the cracks in our consensual reality so that we can become less attached to our beliefs, so that we're able to avoid dogmatism, so that we are able to move from one belief to another, day to day or year to year, stick with it until it is no longer useful. And deconditioning allows us to be able to go, oh, this is no longer useful. Cool, I'm not attached to it, I can just let go of this. And deconditioning is something that it's an ongoing process. You can never be fully deconditioned because more things come up that you need to decondition. And it's just being able to discard or modify your beliefs as needed. Diverse approaches. This is a kind of permission slip to use an eclectic approach. You can work with different systems, with different ideas, with different belief sets as they are helpful and useful to you. I'm gonna make a whole video on the New Age movement, so I'm not gonna talk too much about this, but I just wanna say, for me, what I see, what I've researched, and what I know in myself of how I work the chaotic lens, but also the other practitioners that I have, read, researched, watched their videos of, that are from the chaos framework, the difference between New Age eclecticism and the idea of diverse approaches in chaos magic is, in the New Age, it is very appropriative and lack of respect for where these ideas originally come from, taking them out of context completely, whereas in the chaos framework, there is a respect for the context of where things come from, and rather than plucking things out of their framework and out of their context in an appropriative way, like how New Age does, there is basically an immersion. You immerse yourself in this thing so that you can fully understand it, and you're not just taking it out of context and just like plucking whatever you want. I don't know if I explained that the best, but I tried really hard. So let me know if there's still some confusion on that, and I will do a much better job in explaining that better. But that is what I like about chaos magic. Is it's not just appropriating shit from wherever you want and taking whatever you want out of context. It's immersing yourself in the beliefs and working with what works for you, which to me is obviously much better. Number 6 is Gnosis, entering altered states of consciousness at will. This is obviously something I've been working on for a very long time. I think it'll be 2 years at this point. My meditative practice is probably the biggest part of my practice that I engage in every single day, pretty much no matter what. And there are many different ways in which I do that. And there are 2 kind of different sides of it, is inhibitory and excitatory, and I'm still learning more about these things, so as with literally everything I talk about, other than my own personal experience, I am no authority on it. But inhibitory is a very passive way of entering an altered state of consciousness, and that's like meditation, scrying, and contemplation. Whereas excitatory is a very active way of entering an altered state of consciousness, and that is like chanting, drumming, dancing, emotional and sexual arousal, and then some other things that are not a part of the core principles exactly, but just kind of like big things in the chaos framework is not taking things too seriously, being able to bring humor into your magic. It is all about results. It is like 100% results based. The whole point of everything, the point of all of the core principles, the point of everything is results. It's about efficiency. It's what works and what doesn't, and discarding what doesn't work for you and focusing on what does. Working with belief as a tool and being able to pick it up and set it down, and not being attached to your beliefs, but just using them as needed. And a big part of chaos magic for, I can't say every single one, but the majority of chaos practitioners is paradigm shifting. I will put specifically about paradigm shifting because I don't think I am a great person to explain what this is, but Kellyanne Maddox just very recently made a fantastic video on paradigm shifting and like what it is, how to do it, etc. on her channel. So I will have that linked in the description if you want to learn more about paradigm shifting. Now that I have explained the basics of what chaos magic is, we're going to talk about how this fits into my practice and why I like to use the label chaotic very first and foremost. So because chaos is a framework, I think it is essential to be the first part of my label. I just realized how autistically I'm going about this, and like I love that for me, but it's a little silly. This didn't have to be so organized. I acknowledge how autistic I'm being about this, and I am perfectly okay with that. Anyways, chaos is a framework, and for me, it is how I approach the entirety of my practice. It is the way that I approach my belief in the gods. It is the way that I approach what spells I do, what spell modes, so candle spells or spell bags or not magic or whatever it is. Chaos is the framework and the lens that I view my entire practice from. And the most important thing to me is what's working and what isn't. I don't believe something just because it's a part of, you know, normal like Norse pagan or Norse heathen beliefs. I believe it if it's useful to me, right? So there are things in that belief system that are not useful to me or that are not aligned with my morals, and I choose to not pay much attention or to modify it to a point where it does align with me and it does make sense or it does work for me and the way that I practice my practice. As a system, I personally feel like we have to work from a chaos framework. There is no way for us to effectively or comfortably or happily practice any form of magic or witchcraft or religion or belief without it being from a chaos framework, because, and I've talked about this before, we do not all believe the same things. Some altars fully believe in the existence of the gods outside of ourselves from the beginning of time. Some believe in the gods as archetypes, some believe in the gods as egregores, some don't believe in the gods at all, some are fully atheist, some have interest in other pantheons, although we have decided that for right now we are only going to be working with the Norse pantheon, but some have interest in other pantheons, and some are agnostic, some kind of don't really care what they think or what they believe. Not everyone in our system practices the witchcraft or the magic or whatever you want to call it. So it's just absolutely essential for us to be working from a chaos framework, to be able to make sense of all of this. And being all this chaos, you know, we go between beliefs regularly. So it just makes the most sense and is the most effective way to believe and practice. I don't really know how much else I need to say about all of this other than I love the chaos framework. I love diverse approaches. I love using what works and discarding what doesn't. And I love doing that but still being respectful of other cultures and other beliefs. I am not personally interested in taking from cultures that are not my own, even in a respectful way, you know, fully immersing and not just appropriating stuff. I don't necessarily have a problem with other people doing that. It's just not really for us. We are interested specifically in our Norwegian ancestry and Norse practice, Norse magic, Norse belief, and Norwegian folk magic. So what I'm doing is not yet folk magic, and I am not yet a folk magic practitioner. So I really appreciate that person commenting on that video. That helps me realize this. I'm going to skip over Norse for a second and talk practitioner. I prefer the term practitioner over literally any other term. Even just saying no other word but just calling myself a practitioner to me is better than witch, magician, anything else, specifically because it is the emphasis on the practice part. And where I'm at now in my practice, the most important thing is that I'm actively doing things. I am trying things. I'm experimenting. I am practicing. I am building my skills. So using the label practitioner, for me, A, paints the most accurate picture of what I'm doing, and B, reminds me that the most important thing is to do and to learn by doing. So now we're going to go backwards to the Norse part. I don't think it takes a whole lot of effort to understand why I would use the Norse label. I work with Norse deities. I am working within the Norse belief system and learning more about that. I'm working with the runes. I'm working with a lot of Norse things. So I don't think that's super complicated, but I specifically wanted to talk about why I do not identify as pagan or heathen. It just doesn't work for me. It doesn't make sense to me. I think because of the way that I believe and being a system and having all these, you know, conflicting beliefs and everything, I don't think using a word like that makes sense to me. And one of the reasons I don't feel like Norse pagan or Norse heathen would be an accurate term for me, or just like doesn't work for me, is because while I am Norse leaning in my beliefs and my practices, I am not stuck to that because of my chaotic framework. I am not saying that this is going to be my belief for the rest of my life. I don't need it to be the belief that I hold for the rest of my life. I don't need to die in this belief system. It is useful and working right now, so I'm believing in it and I'm working with it, but I just don't feel that it would be accurate to call myself a Norse pagan or a Norse heathen because I don't even know how long I'm going to believe this for and work with this for. So I just don't personally want to use those words. I am on a path leading towards specifically Norwegian, Norwegian American, Scandinavian, Scandinavian American folk magic. My preference is more Norwegian, Norwegian American. However, I'm going to play it by ear and see, first of all, how many resources, how much stuff I can get on Norwegian and Norwegian American practice, first and foremost. It will also depend on, as I'm able to figure out what region of Norway my ancestors came from. That's going to depend on, you know, like if that place is really far from any of the other Scandinavian countries, then I probably won't incorporate any of that stuff, but let's say my ancestry comes from a place that is directly, like it is Norway, but then also Finland and Sweden right there. So then I may look into that kind of adjacent area and beliefs and practices from there, because those things would have most likely affected each other. And I believe Benta Between Fog and Fen on YouTube talks about this sometimes, being German and being from the part of Germany where the border between Germany and Denmark has changed so much over time that there is a lot of overlap in a lot of beliefs and folk practices and stuff. That is kind of what could be another factor if I kind of look into some other things. But I am going more towards Norwegian American, with an open mind to other Scandinavian countries that I could learn more about and kind of dive into the culture, again, with respect and not in an appropriative way, but in an immersing myself kind of way. I am currently on a path towards a practice that is folk magic and folk medicine, but it wouldn't be accurate to call what I'm currently doing folk magic. So that is the biggest reason why I was like, you know, I actually am definitely wrong, because while it is what I'm leaning towards, it's not what I'm doing yet. So maybe there will be a future where I do use the label Chaotic Folk Practitioner, but for now, Chaotic Norse Practitioner makes the most sense and is the most accurate, and I think just most accurately paints the picture of what I'm doing, so that anyone who comes across this channel can easily or more easily kind of get a snapshot idea of who I am as a practitioner, what I'm doing, and how they want to approach my videos. As I said, I would love any and all resources on Norwegian American, Scandinavian American, all of those things, folk magic, folk medicine, culture, language learning resources, all of the above. I specifically wanted to talk about 2 books that are already on my list for folk magic learning. And I know I just settled out about wanting to be, you know, Norwegian and Norwegian American specific, but one of the books is Trolldom by, I can't remember his name, so I'm just going to put it on the screen. That is, I believe, Swedish? It is either Swedish or Icelandic. Again, I'll put it on the screen, but it's either Swedish or Icelandic folk magic. I think it will be a very helpful resource, and I have heard a lot of really good things about that book, and also the course that I have said I wanted to take previously, but for now it's not super possible. But anyways, so that one, and then Remedies and Rituals by Kathleen Stalker. I don't know how to say her last name, but Kathleen Stalker or Kathleen Stoker, whichever one is correct. I don't know for sure. Those are the books that I already have on my list, and Remedies and Rituals I'm actually currently reading. I do plan on trying to get it secondhand in the future so that I can notate the fuck out of the margins and all that. A very important thing I wanted to say at the end here is, again, labels are just boxes. They are not going to fully paint the picture 100%. They can never be 100% accurate about what you're doing. So like, don't get too caught up in that. You can have a label, you can work with a label, you can work with many labels, and at the end of the day, you can still do whatever you want, as long as you're being respectful and not appropriating or working in closed fucking practices. Don't be a dickhead. But outside of that, you are absolutely allowed to practice things outside of your label. And that does not invalidate that label, and that does not take away from the majority of your practice. Do whatever works. You are allowed to have a different belief system. There are certain paths that are very exclusive. You just work with these things, you just believe these things. That's totally fine. If that works for you, that's fantastic. Outside of that, if you are self-led, you can do whatever works. You do not have to just do folk magic. You do not have to just do witchcraft. You do not have to do just anything. You can work with whatever calls to you, whatever works for you, as long as you are not appropriating other people's cultures and are handling everything with respect for the culture it's coming from. I do personally think that it is generally a lot more productive to go with your own culture, your own ancestral culture. I think there's already quite a lot of potent stuff in our own cultures that we don't really need to be taking from other people's. That's my personal opinion. I don't think anybody is wrong for working with gods or types of magic or whatever that are outside of that, as long as you're facing it with respect and not being appropriative. I don't know how many times I can say that, but you can practice whatever you want. You don't have to only do what fits with your label or fits with how other people view you as a practitioner. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope that you enjoyed it, and if you did, leave a comment, like, and subscribe if you would like to see or hear more from me in the future. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Stay crafty and stay kind. Bye.